Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
So we're talking a day early. The markets are open tomorrow, but we anticipate it's going to be a pretty quiet day. So we thought we would spend our time today maybe talking a little bit about what happened this past year, as well as a couple of other things. So good to see you and Happy New Year before I forget, because next time we talk, it'll be 2022.
It's amazing how fast 2021 has gone by, Megan.
Don't let it hit you in the door on the way out, is all I'm going to say. I'm just excited for a new year. New beginnings are always fun.
That's correct.
All right. To recap, well, let's kick us off today. Let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yep, we started on the cattle side this week, Megan. Some strength in terms of cash cattle. We were up $4.25 this week on fed cattle. Really didn't get a test on those feeder cattle markets as the holiday season has kept trading there pretty limited. On the future side, the February live cattle futures contract closed up 60 cents, and the January feeder cattle contract closed up $3 this week. Higher choice box beef prices as well. We were up nearly $3 this week. That puts them $55 above a year ago. And I should back up for a minute and remind us that cash-fed cattle are now a little more than $28 above where they were a year ago. So although we do talk about maybe wanting higher cattle prices relative to where we sat at the end of 2020, we're in much better shape today. On the hog side, cash barrel and gilt prices up a quarter this week. The February lean hog futures contract has been down 50 cents, and the pork cutout value was up 30 cents as some strength in bellies more than offset the weakness that we saw in hams this week.
It's really like, it's kind of that like black hole period from Christmas to New Year's where not much happens. Feeder cattle markets most were closed this week, so we didn't see any auction or action there. And not only that, last Friday when we talked, we didn't have closing or the weekly slaughter numbers. It's been, I'm assuming, a slow week again this week. I've actually been out of the office most of the week. So let's talk about slaughter numbers for what happened the week of Christmas, so the week ending December 25th.
Yeah, so that was a shortened week. And yes, we didn't get that data out till early this week. I don't know why USDA folks didn't work on Christmas Day, but for some reason they took it off. But for the week ending December 25th, cattle run of 488,000 head. That was down 169,000 head from the previous week, but 72,000 head above where we were a year ago. On the hog side, a run of 1.918 million head. That was down 727,000 from a week earlier, but up 178,000 from same week a year ago.
All right, so we had a couple of reports come out this week, and we're going to incorporate those conversations and that information as we take a look back at what we're going to call our top 3 livestock stories from 2021. Let's start first with supply chain disruptions. And in that, I think we can include labor shortages, port issues, labor shortages, port issues. I think that's been kind of the theme that we've dealt with the entire year.
Yes, and although we're a long ways from cutting our end of 2022 top 3, I'm not convinced that this won't still be in our top 3 when we get a year down the road. I'll start with the idea of labor availability and labor shortage that we've seen. I kind of rewind and go, in the old days, we used to talk about shackle space being the ultimate determinant of weekly runs of either slaughter cattle or slaughter hogs that we could get through the system in a week. But clearly labor has now added complication to that. And just because we have the shackle space doesn't always mean we're going to have the labor availability to make the same kind of runs that we might have made in the past. So we're going to have to watch both of those things. And that labor availability, I don't care where you're at in the system, from farm to ultimately to the retail side, labor availability has been an issue all along the way, whether that's keeping a restaurant fully staffed or getting workers on the farm. It's not just a processing issue. I think it takes us a while to again, get over some of that availability issues that we've seen, Megan.
When we take a look at that, what does that do for, we've seen this renewed interest in this expansion in small, mid-size slaughter capacity and processing facilities. How does that play out in the near, like I would say maybe the near and the midterm as we look at those facilities looking to expand and grow, but how are they going to be able to find people to do those jobs?
So I think all along the way, we're going to have those issues. And for those small plants that are trying to expand, I think, labor is certainly going to be a big issue for them. I continue to say for many of these small plants that are trying to ramp up, finding consumers willing to pay premiums for what's a local product is certainly an important piece of that. So they may not be the most efficient at processing cattle or hogs into beef or pork, but I hope they're in a position where they can market the products out the other end in a way that gets them a premium. And I think that's where, many of these smaller processors that have seen expansion are going to be able to find some positives as we go ahead.
Scott, I want to talk a little bit about the port disruptions and some of the transportation. I mean, because that's been part of our challenge too, more so in getting product out and exporting. And we still saw a fantastic year in trade, which I have a feeling might be also on our list. How does that shake out as we get into 2022? And how does it set up for the rest of this year, this new year?
Yeah, so again, we should be very happy with our export levels of frankly both beef and pork. When you think about them from a value perspective, we moved a value side much higher in 2021 than we did in 2020, despite what was a situation where at times we were seeing some of those vessels going back out of the United States unloaded. That I think created some issues in terms of backlog for us. I think a lot of folks were very innovative in trying to keep trade flowing as we look ahead. Nothing like talking about Mexico and hams, and we've talked about the strength in hams going to Mexico for a period of time. Thank goodness those don't have to get on a ship. We have an opportunity, I think, for more strength, in some of those markets. China's one where perhaps we would have hoped for more strength than we saw, and ports might have had some issue there as we think about, especially on the pork side of the equation. But just like before, labor availability and labor issues have certainly been problematic to keeping ports at least loading some of our products as ships leave the United States.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, I guess maybe one other question on supply chain disruptions. Do we worry about trucking and that aspect of it as well?
Yeah, so I think it's any of this, whether it's transporting inputs to the farm or transporting final products from the farm to the retail, all of those things, we've added cost to this as we talk about some of the supply chain disruptions. I think you look at some of what's going on with the current caseload of COVID today, and I worry that we're going to be in a situation where those supply chains get stressed a little bit harder here over the next few weeks as we continue to see what's been growing cases. So it's all along the way, and it adds cost to getting products from farm to retail or getting inputs to the farm. All of that maybe hurts profitability ultimately at the farm level.
Number 2 on our list for 2021, drought, which seems to kind of pop up every couple of years, and really no exception this year, especially when we look at cattle country and what's been going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested in seeing cattle counts out of USDA here at the end of January to see what really happened in the Dakotas and Montana. Some of the western states that have seen a lot of dry weather. I think that really sets the stage for potentially some higher cattle prices as we look ahead into 2022 and into 2023. But I also don't want to forget the other side of this is we've seen a lot higher feed costs, Megan, as we've had to deal with what was a shorter, especially corn crop in some parts of the country, again, the Dakotas, certainly are the area that sticks out the most. And we have ourselves potentially set up now with higher feed costs as we continue to go through 2022. I worry about the risk, especially the things like feeder cattle prices, as if we see dry weather and we don't get a lot of corn planted next spring, that could be problematic in terms of ultimately what feeder cattle are worth as we get later into 2022.
When we look at that too, and you bring up that January 31st report, I think it's the 31st, right, when it comes out, how much does, does that dictate or change or maybe set us up when we look at the price situation for producers for the rest of the year?
Yes, so I think this is going to be an interesting report, and I say that because I'm curious how many cows and females left the drought areas in 21 to find grass somewhere else in the U.S., ultimately destined to go back into those drought areas as hopefully they get through that drought. To really get a handle on how many cows did we really lose. Now, you and I both know we've looked at the data on both heifers in the feed yard as well as beef cow slaughter, and all that data points to a lot fewer cows than what we would have had January 1 of 2021. But I'm curious to see whether we have had producers in those drought areas that are finding short-term homes for those cows, and they'll come back quicker than we anticipate. Again, I am looking forward to seeing what comes out of that report.
I think the other interesting part about that too is we talk about how high prices maybe triggers expansion, but on the cattle side of things, that's a much slower progress or shift than it is in any of the other major proteins.
Yeah, absolutely, and can create that whipsaw that sometimes is good in terms of higher cattle prices, maybe sometimes not so good longer term. You know, I look at it this way: we could get into 2022 and those drought areas recover or are recovering, and all of a sudden they have pretty strong demand for heifers to get back in those areas. That could actually suck beef supplies even tighter in 2022 than maybe we're thinking at this point in time, and could create higher prices in the short term than even many of us think. And that's hard for us to think about right now, but I just remind us that growing that cow herd at some point probably takes current supplies of beef down more than otherwise would be the case.
All right, number one. And I think we can't leave and we can't talk about this year without talking about demand for red meat. And I'm not just talking here in the United States, which we'll talk a little bit about, but also global demand, and specifically taking a look at what's been going on with China. So let's start and kind of like fracture out that bullet or that number one talking point, and start first with the domestic demand situation, because it also ties in with this week's restaurant performance index.
Yeah, so holy smokes, Megan, right? We look back at 2021 and what a good year from a domestic demand standpoint. I like to kind of take it in segments here, if you will. So early in 2021, as we saw some of the food service side restart in earnest as they came out of COVID-19 and things were reopening in this country, we saw some pretty strong demand trying to refill those pipelines. I think we don't want to forget that happened in 2021, and maybe is one of the reasons why demand can't be quite as strong in 2022. We'll wait and see about that, but strength in both beef and pork demand has just been phenomenal. I like to remind us it might be hard to repeat what we saw in 2021 in 2022, but let's hope that demand strength continues. I don't care really what portion of the beef or pork supply that you want to talk about. We just saw strong demand across the board that I think really set the stage for a much better 2021 than many of us would have thought.
How does that labor picture and the unemployment rate play into there as well? I mean, if people are working, we've seen prices tick up. at the grocery store exponentially this year. So how important is remaining to keep a workforce working to keep that domestic demand strong as well?
Yeah, so if you look at the unemployment numbers, we're now sitting at 3.9% for the November number out of BLS. That's 6.4% below where we were a year ago. So those folks are employed and wages have been growing. Thank goodness, given the kinds of retail prices that we're throwing at consumers. In many cases, we're reporting record level prices for many of the beef and pork products that you and I talk about on a regular basis. If I glance ahead into 2022 and I worry about the economy slowing on top of what's going to be record prices, then maybe I get concerned about consumption, not necessarily demand here, but what happens on the consumption front as, again, record prices and what's a weaker economic picture now. We haven't seen much of that weakness at this point as incomes continue to grow in this country.
We also have to talk about the global demand picture. And I think one of the other asterisks that goes with that is the fact that African swine fever is into the Western Hemisphere. It's not in the United States, but it's closer. How much stress does that put on the global demand picture for pork when so much of our product is exported?
Yeah, so it is I think it is the biggest wild card that we face when we talk about ASF. And I talk about it from if ASF were to happen here in the United States. We know ASF outbreak here likely cuts us out of markets in other countries, at least for a period of time. We can argue about how long that is, and it will depend on exactly how ASF were to infiltrate here in the United States and in terms of what happens. But that's not a scenario that we really want to play out, as we're talking about 20% or so of production that we like to think is leaving the country, and all of a sudden that goes to zero. That's supplies that we get to consume here in the United States, and likely is a pretty negative situation. Now, the flip side of that, we have a lot of competitors with ASF out there that's given us an opportunity to export product to places that maybe otherwise wouldn't be the case. And of course, we can't talk ASF without saying China and some of the growth that we've seen in terms of trade with China, especially pork. And I'll go back to 2020 for that. We wouldn't have probably seen those levels of pork trade with China had it not been for their own ASF issues.
And I think you can't leave without mentioning beef when we're talking about China as well. And while it may not be a top market, it's sure growing at a faster clip than many of the markets that we export beef to.
Yeah, we traditionally might think about places like Japan and South Korea as some of the big places where we see additional beef exports. But frankly, the growth, although not our biggest market, is China. And perhaps that's the bright spot that continues in 2022. The Chinese have potentially gotten a taste of U.S. beef and will continue to be willing to demand beef in 2022. It's a little different than what I see happening on the pork side, where, yes, we got a big run up in pork trade with China in 2020, but that all backed off in 2021 as their own ASF situation at least got in better shape. On the beef side, we got that additional demand bump for reasons other than disease. So I think it could stay with us longer term. If I talked about one of the potential issues on this front, it's going to be to watch Australia, a country coming back from some pretty dry weather that I think might be a stronger competitor, similar quality of beef, not as good as the US, of course, but similar, that could erode some of our growth that we've seen in 2021.
Scott, that'll do it for us for 2021. Another year wrapped up with a nice little bow and out the door.
And let's
Quicker than
break
I
out
can.
the champagne.
Well, not just the champagne. Don't forget all of your agricultural goods that you should be consuming on New Year's Day for good luck. Black-eyed peas, pork, fish, rice, noodles, all favorites in this household. So I think we're set.
Black-eyed peas are ready in this house as well.
All right. Scott, what reports do we have next week?
Next week, we're going to do monthly trade data, and we'll get a jobs report at the end of the first week of 2022.
Excellent. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next Friday.
Sounds good, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And for some great podcast material while you're on the road this holiday season, go to brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Happy New Year. We'll talk to you in 2022. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.